Great. I wanted to make sure that perfect. Okay. Okay. We can go ahead and start. So thank you everybody for being here. Just wanted to go ahead and mention my appreciation for folks in listening, taking the time to listen to this recording of our Firme Role Model series that we've been doing over the last several years in order to connect students here at UC Merced with different professionals. And we try to focus intentionally in different awareness months. So for this month, we're doing Native American and Alaska Native Heritage Month, which has evolved from its beginning as a week-long celebration in 1986, when President Reagan proclaimed November 23 to the 30th in 1986. This time of the month is to explore the heritage, culture, and experiences of Indigenous people historically and in America life today. As a reminder, we must make sure to celebrate all year long. I'm excited to present our female role model person that we're interviewing today, Rey Soto. Started his professional career in the behavioral mental health field, working for the San Diego American Indian Health Center as a family facilitator, advocating for Native youth and their families. When he moved to Los Angeles in 2002, he continued working with Native communities as a case manager for 7 generations at the United American Indian Involvement, gaining his experience and expertise as a special education advocate in domestic violence, victim advocate, community resources specialist, and paraprofessional. Rey was able to assist families from marginalized communities throughout his early career. He spent several years working for Aviva Family and Children's Services as a special education high school teacher, and then an education manager, as well as a few years working as a behaviorist for Focus Educational Services. These experiences culminate in 15 years of fieldwork and helping at-risk youth, families in need, and advocating for marginalized communities. 2016, Rey left fieldwork and began a new career path with academia as a data systems and analyst in the Department of Epidemiology in UCLA. During his first 5 years at UCLA, Rey has been elected president of Bruin Tech and Staff Assembly, has been appointed president of the Native American Staff Association, chair of the Epidemiology Staff Association, chair of the Green IT Task Force, and serves on the American Indian Studies Center for Faculty Advisory Committee. The UCLA, I'm sorry, there's a lot of things that you're doing, Rey, so super excited about that. And the UCLA Sustainability Committee, the School of Nursing Sustainability Committee, and the Epidemiology Anti-Racism Task Force, and the Department of Department of Epidemiology EDI Committee. He is currently the lead beekeeper, so this is where it gets more creative, beekeeper of UCLA's new apiary as a California Master Beekeeper Program apprentice, helping to bring for the first time a science-based approach to beekeeping to UCLA's community. Rey plans to remain a permanent employee at UCLA with plans to retire from whatever position he finds himself in the next 30 years. His commitment to research and academia will follow him in death, as he is a proud body donor to UCLA's David Geffen School of Medicine. So that is our speaker here, and super excited to get to know you a little bit more and to know the fact that you are donating your body to science. That's exciting. I think you're the first person I've ever met that actually has that plan to do that. So maybe at some point you can give us a little bit more information about that, Rey. And thank you for being here. I'm very excited to get to know you a little bit more, and then to share your experience with our student body as well.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
Great. So we're going to have an opportunity for you to share a little bit about yourself in more detail. So I have a couple of questions that we tend to ask all of our presenters. And again, we will take some questions if folks afterwards have any particular questions. We are planning to upload this to our YouTube channel. And so at the end, we'll talk a little bit about the benefit of people going back and reviewing this interview. But I'll pause here to give you an opportunity to share some of your background with us in more detail. What were your experiences growing up? How did your identity impact your career decisions?
It didn't. My growing up, I grew up in a small border town called Calexico, border town to Mexicali. And the community I was in was all Spanish speaking community, but it was interestingly diverse in that we had a lot of immigrant populations from essentially all over the world because they were using that border town to get back and forth between the two countries. But the culture that it was just a border town. It was a trade route, and so my culture as a native person didn't really have an impact or didn't really establish anything in that. You know, I'm fluent in Spanish because I grew up in that area. And I remember kids who would come from, like, I remember this one kid who came from Korea, could barely speak any English, but by the end of his first summer with us, you know, running around as kids, he could cuss out anybody in Spanish. And then by the end of his second summer with us, he was having conversations with our parents. So it's just, Spanish was just there as a culture, and it didn't matter where in the world you came from. So it was that kind of environment, but it didn't, I don't know that it directly had an impact on my career path, but it did give me a sense of what was necessary for growth in the families that I supported in my career. So it growing up in that neighborhood, I didn't have the traumatic childhood that I know a lot of people have had with abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or any abuse like that, or any trauma like that. I did experience and had very close relations with food insecurity. So that was definitely something that was prevalent throughout the community. It was food insecurity and having to deal with, it wasn't abuse, but it was certainly harassment by the Border Patrol agents. So today they're ICE, back then it was just the Border Patrol. And they're, even then as law enforcement, they had this sense of entitlement in the neighborhood and the sense of just being really jerks to everyone in the community. And so that did also provide me with some concept and an idea of what the families that I later on ended up helping with, what it meant to be under the guise of this overpowering law enforcement entity like local police departments and sheriffs and all of that. But yeah, my culture itself as a child didn't really have a huge impact in my career.
Anything else that you think would be helpful to share with our students in regards to the importance of understanding or of living as someone who identifies within the community? Because I think for us here at UC Merced, there's a lot of students that I've seen that sometimes struggle with their cultural identity. So anything that you can talk about that maybe growing up helped you and guided you in embracing your cultural identity?
No, in fact, there was more barriers than assistance. So as a Native person, my family and my family history is similar to many others, especially for, so I'm Yoeme, Yaqui. My tribe essentially goes from all of Sonora, Mexico, all of the desert of Sonora in Mexico. So picture Tucson way down into Hermosillo, all along the Yaqui River. So that's essentially our territory of migration. But both the Mexican and American governments did a really good job of instilling fear in our communities of identifying as being Native or indigenous. And so the generation of my grandparents and great grandparents, they chose to go the safer route. And they chose to essentially ignore and leave behind their Native culture, the language, and everything that had to do with it, so that they can then either be more of a nationalist identity, be more Mexican or be more American, or have a little bit of both, but not have the identity of their race or their ethnicity. So that carried over to the generation after, so my parents, and then on to me. So my parents, because they didn't get that information, they didn't have that identity shared with them, just hints and stories here and there of the family and of history and pictures we had of our ancestors, and like, oh yeah, and just looking at the pictures, like, yeah, that guy's Native, look at him. But it was more, but we don't know anything because nothing was shared. Our grandparents, great grandparents, it was that fear that no, we have to leave that behind. We have to be Mexican, or we have to be American, or we have to be a little of both, but we can't be Native. And so what I would share with students, well, first is the academic part of it, right? I often hear students, and just generally any person, use terms like Mexican as a race or ethnicity. It's a nationality, it's a government. And so that just instills and progresses this genocide of culture where you recognize your nationality, but not your ancestry. It's lost, it's gone. And if you don't have it, you can't use it to, I don't know, I guess both Mexican and American governments fear the uprising of these Indian people again. And I suppose that's where they went with it, but it was successful because I hear and see a lot of non-white, these clearly Native people all over California that have no idea what their Native roots are because it was taken from them and they've lost it. And I don't know what the solution is to get it back.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think that you did a wonderful job at kind of really airing out some of the problematic issues that have happened in many families. And here at UC Merced, we do have a lot of individuals that may identify, nationally, but yet they're struggling with identifying to that indigenous side of their background. And so it is something that I'm glad you also mentioned that, there's no solution sometimes, right? Or it's something that validates possibly some of the folks that are going to be listening to this, maybe of some of their experiences. But let me ask you this then. How is it, or where do you gain the strength to continue to do the work, or to continue to be an advocate for the community?
Personal choice. I have chosen to take that route. It's something that I decided on as an adult, as an independent person with no influence from anyone, just something I wanted to do. And I think that that's important to instill on students and on anybody, is do whatever it is you want to do in your life, as long as you are not harming yourself or anybody else, either physically, emotionally, or mentally. If there is no harm in the choice you're making, have at it. You're going to screw up. You're going to make mistakes. I love making mistakes. Great lessons learned from them, as long as they're not harming somebody, including yourself. So I made the choice of pursuing that cultural identity and ensuring that I went back, and when some of the elders from my family were still alive, I wish I had the presence of mind that I do now to ask questions then. But I was able to get some information and get some idea of identity and culture, and where that would lead me to today. And so that's what I use now to essentially, yes, I'm on the right path. I'm going to gain that knowledge however I can, and then make sure that it passes on. And so it's knowledge that I am now passing on to my own kids.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And also the fact of, again, passing it on, right? Once you've been able to have some of that knowledge, that you also, like you said, it's a choice, right? If we're going to even pass it forward, because there's some folks that don't. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So let me ask you then this question. Now that you are involved in so many professional organizations that do focus on the importance of Native American or even anti-racism work that you're doing, how do you navigate with some of the challenges or some of the comments, microaggressions that people might, that you might encounter in some of these spaces? What are what's something helpful that you can share to students as they're gaining, professional development, if they use this as, as a tool for professional development? What's something that you can share about how to navigate those types of challenges that they might experience within their profession that they choose?
I don't know if I have an honest answer I don't know if my experience was because of the choices I made or something else. I can't honestly say that I experience a lot of racism growing up or even now. I don't know that I can pass off as ambiguously ethnic. So I can essentially I can tell anybody that I'm anything and they'll believe me. But I do think that my interactions and not being ridiculed or being faced with any white supremacy or anything like that is because of just how I handle myself, how I talk even. I avoid filler language. I avoid using metaphors or cliches or speak in analogies. I've essentially taken the colonizing language of English, mastered it as best as I could, and I've essentially used that to overpower all of that. So I took this weapon that they used against us, and I'm simply just regurgitating. I'm using it back against them. And it is something that I make sure that I do in every environment that I walk into. So the idea of code switching, I always have a presence of mind of code switching and who my audience is, even if it's just one-on-one out on the streets or one in a room of 100. The language I use and how I choose to use it, I think is important. And again, it's just anecdotal. I don't know if that's actually what has worked for me, but I feel it has.
Yeah, I mean, hearing you, that's you really finding a strategic way of handling the situation to also minimize any potential, right? Can you talk a little bit about code switching for some folks? Because some of our students might not understand what that is. If you can give an example, that would be helpful.
Code switching is an anthropological term. So everybody does it when Thanksgiving is coming up. For those of you for people who go out and spend that time with family, their behaviors, how they talk will change from that environment and will be different than if they went to, say, a family of a friend who invited them over. Their behavior, their language, how they present themselves will be different. And that character also changes when you're at a workplace, and it changes when you're at an amusement park, and it changes when you're at the doctor's office. So your behavior, your language, how you present yourself, your character changes depending on who you're interacting with and in what environment. And so you're switching yourself to, some people do it just to piss other people off. Some people do it so that they can shrink and hide and not be seen. So it really all depends, but that's essentially the essence of code switching, is the changing of your language, of your character, of who you are and how you're viewed.
Thank you for sharing that. And you know, to be honest, sometimes it's also a survival mechanism.
It very much is, yes.
Depending on those spaces, right? If we feel safe or not safe, right?
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't think we've had any of our guests in the last year actually talk about that as a tool or as a strategy, right? Especially, I think it's important as folks continue to shape who they are in their career. They're going to have to utilize that at some point. So I'm glad now we can give them a term that they can use. So let me ask you this, in regards to all this work that you're doing, one thing that I want to be mindful is that when we're doing a lot of activist work, we also have to honor kind of our support system. So can you share anything in regards to what does your support system look like, or anything that you do to kind of assess kind of your well-being? Because I think especially during these hectic times, especially politically where we're at, what do you do in regards to reinforcing your support system or just taking care of yourself?
It's just something that I do. I don't, growing up and even now as an adult, I've always been extremely independent, and I've been able to really have an understanding of myself, who I am and my own character. I have never been susceptible to peer pressure. Nobody has ever been able to redirect me in their opinion or their perspective or whatever they thought I should or shouldn't be doing. I don't have a large network of friends, quote unquote. I have a small number of people that I that are close to me. And that's really all I need. This pandemic part, it's been wonderful for me because I haven't had to socialize. And
Mhm.
I'm not a very social person. I can go to a room and talk to people. I just don't want to. It's not, if I meet somebody for the first time, it's not, oh yes, I'm gonna make them my best friend. It's like, no, they weren't part of my life before and I've been fine. I don't need them in my life now. I don't have to do any people pleasing here. And
Mhm.
it's something that I hold true to, and I'm confident in that if somebody comes along in my life, they really need to have something to offer me in order for me to let them into that very inner circle of mine. Otherwise, they're an acquaintance. Everybody's an acquaintance to me until, okay, they want to pursue a friendship or a relationship beyond that. But I'm very comfortable in who I am, in what I'm doing, and I am my own support group because I'm very in tune to who I am and what it is I'm doing in my own life.
Thank you. That's refreshing and it's helpful, I think, for some of our students. If they're not in the place that you're in, then they have something to look forward to in regards to you can be everything that you describe of independence, which I think sometimes there's that fear, right? That kind of going back to what you said about the peer pressure that we have to be involved in everything. But we don't really talk about the importance of having that self-realization of who we are as a person and as people, right? So I'm glad that you mentioned that because I think it's really helpful to also validate some of, again, maybe some of the struggles that some of our viewers might be currently right now dealing with. So it's helpful. But let me ask you then, in general, what's something that you do to kind of unwind or decompress when, something's going on? Because come on now, not everything, there's moments where you're, probably really busy with the bees or something. I think, because it's also really helpful for folks to know different forms of, taking care of your body, your spirit, your mind, anything that you can share about a self-care.
Watching a lot of shows and movies is always good. I I I don't I don't stress.
Hmm.
It's something I don't need to find ways to de-stress because it just doesn't. I actually look for stress in work because it's the only time I can get all excited and, oh, I have a deadline, excellent, and it gets me excited.
Okay.
But I don't stress about life. I don't stress about what's going to happen or what's not going to happen. I don't. It's just my life has no anxiety in it, and I'm not exactly sure how or why it's come to that, but life is good for me. I haven't honestly had a bad day in 15, 20 years. I mean, I've had some rough days, but I wouldn't say that I've had a bad day.
Great. I appreciate you saying it like that in regards to, because sometimes I think we're in a society that makes us feel like we have to uh, kind of allow that anxiety or those bad days to kind of throw us, kick us in the butt. But um, this is why we're doing these kinds of presentations, to give people, some of our student body, other alternatives of how to see things, right? Because sometimes we have some of our students that are giving so much of their power to something that is so external sometimes they can't control, that it puts them in a difficult situation. But I'm glad that you're mentioning the way that you're choosing to live your life, to not give your power to that external. And also, I'm amazed, and you are my Firme role model about that you haven't had a bad day. So that's something for me to look forward to as well, because sometimes I've given into that, but now I know that you can also choose not to. So very helpful. Thank you. So I know that we're almost at our time, but any advice that you would give any undergrads that are watching this, any of our watchers, what advice would you give them as they're growing and developing as young professionals?
Well, I would go back to a few things you mentioned. All emotions are a choice. Every emotion you have is a choice. You can choose to have it, or you can choose not to. And it's not easy. It's not easy to be feeling anger and then choose to let it go, because it's just difficult, especially with whatever got you angry to begin with. But I think if people have that knowledge that they can control their emotions and they should be in control of their emotions, things can look better. And you also mentioned control, and yeah, I never worry about things I can't control. If it's out of my control, oh well, there it goes.
Mhm.
Buildings burning down, I have no control over it. I can call for a fire department. I have a fire extinguisher, I use it, but there is nothing I can do about it. I'm not going to stress about it.
Yeah.
So it is a great thing to recognize yourself, have confidence, keyword, have confidence in your own ability, confidence in yourself as a human being. You do not need anything to tell you how to be a human. You don't need religion to tell you what morals are. You don't need government to tell you what ethics are. You as a person, you as an individual already have that. It's in your genetics to be a good person. You just have to choose how you're going to do that.
Yeah. Great advice for our students. I think this is a perfect timing, time of the year where many of them are very reflective. Some of them go home and they're in situations where, again, they have no control over their family, for example. So this is, I think, a great opportunity to remind students, right? The fact that we can control our emotions. So I'm very thankful for you spending this time with us and sharing a little bit about yourself, and also very helpful tips that I hope some of the folks that are listening to this could also apply to their lives. And also know, I think also confidence is something that, it sometimes you have to feed confidence, right?
Oh,
We
yeah.
might, like you said, we start off with it, but we need to feed into it and we need to practice it. And so I'm hoping that this is an opportunity for folks to remind them to practice and to claim confidence, right? Because it is something that is part of them. Perfect. Anything else? Another statement just before we end? We're gonna hit stop recording and then we'll open it up. If there's anyone that has a question to ask, we'll answer it offline. But again, just as a reminder, before I give you the last word, is just that we're asking folks to take the time to listen to this. And then afterwards, we have a survey that we ask individuals to submit, and then individuals are incorporated into a kind of a lottery that we do where we'll give out prizes for individuals for taking the time in your own home to be able to listen to this is helpful, I think, for individuals. And again, as a reminder, Native American Heritage Month is something that should not be celebrated just for this month, but all year round. So I'll give it to you, Ray, for a last comment.
Thanks. I do want to come back because you said you wanted to hear a little bit more about me being a body donor.
Oh, yes.
I love science. I think it is wonderful, and it is something that I would encourage people to look into, mainly because it's free. I mean, people stress about who's going to pay for the funeral and pay for this, and it's expensive to have your body decay in today's society and culture. Whereas I'm going to give it to medicine, going to have a whole bunch of medical students doing whatever it is that they want with my dead carcass, and they're going to learn from it. They're going to be better doctors because of it, and it's not going to cost me or my family a penny, nothing. They're going to take care of all of it. No stress for anybody. And it is something that I believe strongly in, because just having my body take up property, like real estate somewhere, is just silly. And it takes up land which we don't have, that is already being overused, used in politics, used for this. It's just chaos beyond imagining.
Yeah.
And it's just something that makes sense to me, to donate my body to science, have it do actually something rather than just rot in the ground somewhere.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that, and also about the fact that you're contributing to science and making doctors better doctors, right? Because and this is you giving them that permission, right? And because, you know, we have a history of them not asking for permission. So this is participating and actually contributing to advancing science. You know, and again, it's something that helps the fact that you don't have to take up that additional space. I'm going to have to think about that, because I think you've landed on something, because it's very costly. And if, you know, if our bodies can help science and help communities, I think that's a great, I think you're a good spokesperson for it. I think it's something I'm gonna have to look into.
Imagine how many arguments your family is going to avoid to who gets to go to your funeral and who can be there and who is, and well, we want to do this, and they should wear this in their coffin. We want this coffin and not that coffin. And it's just terrible stuff for families when we have a loved one pass.
Yeah, it is. So I'm excited to look more into that, and I thank you for bringing that up, because I think that is something that we should all maybe consider. You know, it doesn't hurt to consider and look into it. So I'm glad that you were able to leave us with that as an opportunity, right? Because it's a reality of where we're all going. And so if we can take a little bit more ownership of what happens to our bodies, then why not? So I'm glad that you mentioned it. And again, thank you very much. The Care Office really appreciates you participating as a Firme role model, and looking forward to maybe other future collaborations. And we'll go ahead and put pause on the recording at this point. So